I never imagined that coming home early to check on my grandfather would throw me straight into the start of a neighborhood war. When I opened the front door, instead of seeing Frank's usual warm smile, I found his wheelchair tipped over, his arm twisted at a painful angle, and a sharply dressed woman in a business suit towering over him as if she owned the place. "I'm Patricia Sterling, your new HOA president," she announced in a piercing voice that could cut glass. "Your grandfather has violated community rules and owes a fine of $25,000 effective immediately." The thing was, our neighborhood had never even had an HOA before. What the self-appointed dictator didn't realize was that she had chosen the wrong man to mess with. My grandfather wasn't some fragile retiree, he was living under FBI protection, and Patricia was about to learn that the hardest way imaginable. The whole moment felt unreal. Patricia carried herself with a sense of fake authority, a clipboard in hand, laminated badges, and stacks of official documents that screamed, "I'm important, so you better listen." She immediately slipped into full-blown power trip mode, radiating peak Karen energy. When I asked how she got inside, she snapped back, "I don't need permission, I'm the president." Then came the classic entitled lines, "This is unacceptable. I'll have you reported. Do you even know who I am?" But what really shook me was how she fixated on Frank the moment she saw his wheelchair. Her expression lit up with the predatory look of someone who thought they'd found the perfect easy target. Frank, ever polite, tried to calmly question her. "When was this HOA formed? Who elected you?" But instead of responding, Patricia grew aggressive via getting in his face, waving papers around, spitting venom. "Maybe you need to learn to respect authority," she snarled. And then, in her reckless flailing, she knocked Frank's wheelchair over. He hit the ground hard, his arm smacking against the side table with a sickening crack. Patricia's reaction? A cold, dismissive, "Maybe next time you'll listen to authority." She actually tried to make it sound like it was his fault. I snapped, "What HOA? This neighborhood never had one." But Patricia, smug as ever, flashed a self-satisfied grin. "Well, you do now. I was elected by the community." She shoved official documents into my hands, the meeting notes, violation letters, forms that looked legitimate enough, but I could tell something was wrong. Dates didn't line up, signatures looked suspiciously alike. She had clearly gone to great lengths to fake credibility. The violations she listed were absurd. According to her, Frank's grass was an inch too tall, our fence color didn't comply with standards, and supposedly, multiple neighbors had complained about Frank disturbing the peace. That one really got me. Frank is the quietest man alive. He spends his days reading books and watching old films. If that's disturbing the peace, then the complainers are the problem. But Patricia had an answer for everything. "Multiple neighbors have complained. This is just the beginning if you don't cooperate." Then came the threat, $25,000 fine or your property will be forced into sale. Who even talks like that? It became clear she had done some homework or at least surface-level research. She knew Frank was elderly, disabled, and living with his college-aged grandson. She thought we'd be easy prey, classic predator behavior, target the vulnerable and assume they won't fight back. She even had the audacity to suggest Frank might be confused about community decisions, as though his age or disability somehow invalidated him. This woman had literally forced her way into our home, hurt my grandfather, and still acted like she was generously explaining the rules to us. But Patricia had no clue who she was really dealing with. My grandfather wasn't just some ordinary man in a wheelchair. She had chosen the wrong victim. As I helped Frank back up and into his chair, I saw pain in his eyes, but also something else, a sharpness, a calculating look, as if he were mentally recording every detail. At the time, I thought he was just preparing to file a police report. What I didn't realize was that Frank was already 3 steps ahead of Patricia Sterling. The confrontation may have only lasted 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. She made her ultimatum clear: pay up, follow the new HOA rules, or face consequences. Before leaving, she tossed a professional-looking business card onto the table. "I'll be back tomorrow for your decision," she declared, walking out as if she had just claimed victory. The moment she left, Frank slumped in his chair, more defeated than I had ever seen him. "Maybe we should just pay, Jake," he murmured. "Sometimes it's easier to comply." That rattled me more than her threats because that wasn't like him at all. After getting Frank's arm checked out, thankfully just badly bruised, not broken, I couldn't let the whole thing go. Something about Patricia's documents kept nagging at me. So I started digging. When I looked into the laws on forming HOAs in our city, my stomach dropped. Patricia's paperwork showed the HOA had been filed and approved in a single day. But no ordinary person has that kind of pull. Who could possibly fast-track government documents overnight? Patricia showed up the very next day, but this time she wasn't alone. She brought a small entourage she claimed were community representatives. Looking back now, it's obvious they were nothing more than hired actors, but in that moment, they passed as genuine, concerned neighbors. She had gone full dictator Mahdia, clipboard in hand, fake badges shining, and that shrill voice ringing out like a bad sermon. As your duly elected HOA president, I have full authority to enforce our standards, she proclaimed, as if she were laying down divine law. The staged meeting she held right in our front yard was pure manipulation theater. Her so-called supporters nodded along enthusiastically, tossing in comments like, "Yes, our property values are suffering, something must be done about this." Then Patricia escalated her campaign, going door to door throughout the neighborhood, spreading outrageous lies about Frank. She painted him as disruptive, negligent, even dangerous. She claimed his wheelchair made noise at night, that he failed basic maintenance, and worst of all that he was somehow unsafe around children. Every story was completely fabricated, but the way she told them was so polished, so calculated, that people started believing her. It was textbook social isolation, a classic predator tactics. She methodically turned neighbors against us, making Frank look like the one dragging the entire community down, and disturbingly, she was good at it. When I tried to fight back through official channels, I hit nothing but brick walls. The police dismissed it as a civil dispute with valid documents. City Hall claimed her HOA registration looked legitimate and that I needed to follow proper procedure. Even the legal aid office brushed me off, saying cases like this required expensive fraud litigation. It was as if Patricia had anticipated every defense I might try and set up barriers in advance. She pushed harder every day. Suddenly, she had inspectors arriving to check our plumbing and wiring, inventing violations out of thin air. Fake notices piled up, late fees, penalty interest, even legal threats that looked frighteningly official. The worst moment came when she ambushed Frank at the grocery store. In front of dozens of people, she shouted, "This is what happens when residents don't respect authority." Her voice carried through the entire store, while Frank sat helpless in his wheelchair, humiliated. She ranted on about compliance and community standards as if she were teaching him a lesson. But around this time, I noticed something else. Something strange in Frank's behavior. He started taking hushed phone calls, always lowering his voice, always hanging up when I walked in. I caught bits and pieces. They don't know a broken bar, can't let them find out a broken bar. He also kept a second phone hidden in his bedroom, calling it for emergencies, but he refused to explain. This wasn't the grandfather I knew. He seemed nervous, secretive, constantly telling me, "Don't stir things up, son. Sometimes it's safer to just pay and move on." That wasn't like him at all. And it worried me more than Patricia's constant harassment. The next fake home meeting was another performance. Patricia gathered her hired actors again, this time mixed with some real neighbors who had swallowed her lies. They shouted that Frank was lowering property values, demanded action, and treated us like pariahs. It worked. Neighbors who once waved and chatted now crossed the street to avoid us. People averted their eyes when they saw Frank. I overheard whispers, "That family is trouble for everyone." Patricia had managed to turn us into the neighborhood outcasts. The toll it took on Frank was heartbreaking. He started avoiding the store, staying inside, isolating himself even further. It was as if Patricia had stolen not just his reputation, but his dignity. When I dug deeper online, I discovered something chilling. Cases just like ours had been reported in multiple states. Elderly homeowners targeted with fake HOAs, aggressive scare tactics, and crushing financial pressure. The stories were always the same: forged paperwork, harassment, threats, and social ostracism. Victims were older people with valuable homes, living alone or with little family support. Patricia wasn't just freelancing. This was organized, It was professional, and the motive was clear: force the elderly to sell their homes below market value, then flip the properties for massive profits. Her boldest stunt yet came when she marched up to our door with a locksmith in tow. "This property is non-compliant," she declared, "so I have the authority to secure it until violations are resolved." Then she actually ordered the locksmith to start changing our locks as if she owned the house. The entitlement was staggering. She truly behaved like every home in the neighborhood belonged to her. As Patricia tried to push her way further into our home, she gave me that look the one dangerous Karens always get when someone dares to stand in their way. "You're making this far more difficult than it needs to be," she said with a cold, practiced smile that made my skin crawl. Then she pulled out her phone and uttered the words that still send a chill down my spine: "I'm calling my enforcement team. You have 30 minutes to comply or you'll face immediate eviction." What froze my blood wasn't just the threat, it was the name on her phone screen. The contact she dialed wasn't labeled HOA Legal or Community Services. It was labeled the cleaner. What kind of HOA president has the cleaner on speed dial? Tell me, Anna Dramanesque Familia, have HOAs where you live ever gone this far? When Patricia returned the next day, she wasn't bluffing. This time she brought what she called her enforcement team. But these weren't more fake community members, they were two large men in expensive suits. The kind of men who looked like they could snap someone in half without breaking stride. "This is your last chance to comply voluntarily," Patricia declared with absolute confidence, like someone who had never once been told no in her life. The intimidation was no longer subtle. The fake politeness was gone. These men weren't talking about paperwork, they were standing around Frank's wheelchair in a way that made their intentions obvious. Watching my grandfather crumble under their pressure was heartbreaking. The same man who had always carried himself with dignity and independence was now begging. "Just tell me what to pay and I'll pay it," he whispered, his voice shaking in a way I had never heard before. At the same time, his strange behavior was getting worse. More secretive phone calls, more nervous glances over his shoulder, more muttered fragments I couldn't understand. "They don't know a broken bar, can't let them find out a broken bar, it's been too long." And when I pushed for answers, he pulled back even further, shutting me out completely. It was clear that something much bigger than Patricia's HOA scam was haunting him. I started knocking on doors, speaking with every neighbor on our street, and the truth unraveled fast. No one had ever voted for an HOA. No one had even heard of Patricia Sterling before she arrived a few months back. Neighbors were baffled. "We never had a meeting," they told me. "Nobody asked us about forming an HOA." The so-called community support Patricia boasted about was 100% fake. Every signature, every complaint, every vote had been manufactured. Some neighbors even admitted Patricia had come to them with false stories about Frank, tricking them into signing petitions they now realized were bogus. What chilled me most was learning how calculated her campaign against Frank truly was. This wasn't random. She had spent months studying our street before striking. She had chosen Frank with precision, elderly, disabled, living with a grandson who'd be gone for college much of the time. The perfect target. Patricia knew his routines. She had watched our house, learned Frank's schedule, and moved in when she thought he was most vulnerable. This wasn't just a scam, it was a hunt. Her research was thorough in obvious ways as she dug into our finances, property records, family details, even Frank's medical appointments. She knew enough to believe she had the upper hand. What she overlooked was Frank's hidden past, his old law enforcement ties buried deep in records not easy to find. Her arrogance blinded her. She thought she knew everything. And once she realized her fabricated community support was slipping, her tactics escalated into open threats. Her so-called enforcers loomed over Frank, blocking his chair, muttering that accidents happen to those who resist. By then, I wasn't just worried about harassment. I was genuinely terrified for my grandfather's safety. These people weren't just bluffing. They were ready to use force to get what they wanted. With each encounter, Frank seemed to shrink a little more. The strong, confident man who raised me was vanishing, replaced by someone jumpy, withdrawn, and too willing to say yes just to make the threats stop. But his fear seemed to reach deeper than just Patricia and her goons. He kept dropping cryptic references to his past, mentioning old cases, people who don't forget, and things that had no logical connection to some fake HOA scam. Whenever I pressed him for details, he became even more secretive, guarding that strange emergency phone as if it were a lifeline. That phone wasn't a normal cell, it looked like it was connected to some kind of special network, and Frank treated it like his very survival depended on it. Maybe it did. Eventually, Patricia's lies started to collapse under their own weight. Neighbors began comparing notes, realizing they had all been manipulated. Once they actually spoke to one another instead of listening to Patricia's poison, her narrative crumbled. The turnaround was fast. Neighbors apologized to Frank, offered their support, even volunteered to testify against her deceitful tactics. Patricia's carefully built illusion of community support dissolved almost overnight, and that's when her mask started to crack. A predator with no escape becomes the most dangerous kind, and Patricia Sterling was definitely cornered. She made her most frightening move yet. With no fake authority left to lean on, she escalated into raw threats. This can be resolved the easy way or the hard way, she warned Frank in what she called a final compliance meeting. There was no more pretense of being an HOA president. She revealed herself for what she truly was, a criminal ready to use violence to take what she wanted. Frank tried desperately to shield me. Go stay with your friends for a few days, he urged. Over and over. He refused to explain why, only that serious trouble was coming and he wanted me nowhere near it. In one heartbreaking moment, he even apologized for dragging me into this, as if any of it were his fault. I couldn't leave him, but his secrecy was maddening. Patricia's grand finale as fake HOA president was a public spectacle in our front yard. She brought her muscle and shouted, "Last chance, comply or face immediate consequences." Loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear, she delivered the threat with such entitled conviction that if you didn't know better, you might think she really did own Frank's house. She scheduled her so-called final enforcement for the next day at 2 p.m., promising to return with serious force to seize the property. That night, Frank seemed completely resigned. No more secret calls, no visible planning, just quiet, defeated acceptance. "When they come tomorrow, stay in your room no matter what you hear," he told me. Some battles aren't worth fighting. But as he wheeled away, I noticed something strange: a phone charger cord running under his wheelchair cushion, leading to something I couldn't see. The next day, Patricia's enforcement rolled in like a wrecking ball. Right at 2 o'clock sharp, she showed up with 2 massive men whose only purpose was intimidation. There was no more illusion of legality. "Time for compliance is over," Patricia declared, forcing her way into our home. "This is property seizure." The act was over. The fake president was gone. In her place stood someone completely comfortable ordering violence to get her way. The brutality began almost instantly. Patricia turned to her men with chilling casualness. "Make him sign the transfer papers. Use whatever force is necessary." I tried to block them, but they shoved me aside and pinned me back. Patricia advanced on Frank, and the twisted smile on her face made my stomach turn. She was enjoying his fear. "You should have complied when you had the chance," she sneered, leaning close to him. "This is what happens to people who don't respect authority." Her power trip had reached its peak. Frank looked like he was breaking under the pressure, cowering and begging in a performance so convincing it could have won awards. Frank, desperate to keep me safe, begged Patricia not to hurt me. He agreed to sign whatever documents she wanted, apologized for resisting, and promised full cooperation. Patricia reveled in her dominance. She had reduced a proud old man to pleading for mercy while holding his terrified grandson captive. "This is what compliance looks like," she declared with cruel satisfaction, basking in the illusion of total power. It was the ultimate control fantasy, subjugating people through fear and brute force. Then, as if gloating weren't enough, Patricia began to brag openly about her operation. "I've pulled this scam dozens of times across different states," she boasted. "The elderly never put up a real fight. They're too scared, too alone, too dependent on family who don't want to make waves." She even admitted that some victims required extra persuasion, describing it with such casual cruelty that my stomach turned. She explained that Frank was chosen deliberately. To her, he was the perfect target. An old man in a wheelchair, living with only one young relative, vulnerable, helpless, easy prey. Watching her force Frank through the signing process was torture. She shoved deed transfers, power of attorney papers, and financial documents in front of him while her hired thugs restrained me, threatening worse if we resisted. Frank looked utterly broken, whispering apologies to me again and again. I didn't realize until later that something crucial had happened in the middle of it all. When Patricia pressed Frank's hand against the documents, she accidentally triggered a hidden emergency switch built into his wheelchair's armrest. No one noticed. There was no sound, no flashing light, nothing to give it away. To everyone in that room, it looked like Frank had surrendered completely, assigning away his home, his dignity, and everything he had to save us from further violence. But quietly, invisibly, something else had been set in motion. Patricia's victory was vile to witness. Once the papers were signed under duress, she triumphantly declared that the house now belonged to Sterling Properties LLC. She strutted through the rooms like a new owner, talking about renovations and bragging about flipping the place for profit. When she ordered me to start packing and told us we had 24 hours to leave, I felt crushed. The legal system had failed us completely. The police wouldn't help, and now violent criminals had used intimidation to steal our home. My desperate call to 911 was brushed off. "This looks like a civil property matter," the dispatcher told me. Even though the papers had been signed with armed men looming over us, the law saw it as a legitimate transaction. I felt powerless. Patricia had won by being more ruthless, more prepared, and willing to wield violence without hesitation. Frank, for his part, seemed utterly defeated. He wouldn't talk about what happened. It was like watching his spirit snap in real time. Patricia's arrogance hit its peak as she taunted us. "Next time, maybe you'll respect authority from the start," she sneered at Frank, mocking his helplessness. She never once considered that he might have resources she didn't know about. To her, he was nothing but the broken old man she wanted him to be. Her blind spot was total. She saw only what she expected, a helpless veteran and his powerless grandson, stripped of everything. From her point of view, she had orchestrated the perfect crime of violence dressed up as legality, theft disguised as paperwork, and victims too intimidated to resist. As she left, Patricia promised to return the next morning to take full possession of the house. Frank kept up his defeated act until the door closed behind her. Then, in a quiet voice, he turned to me and said, "Sometimes the good guys have backup plans, son." At the time, I thought it was just a hollow attempt to give me hope, words meant to comfort me as we faced the loss of everything. Patricia, meanwhile, walked away convinced she had already won. She had the documents, the transfers, the signatures, and 2 defeated victims who looked completely incapable of fighting back. From her perspective, it was finished. While I sulked in my room, feeling utterly defeated, I overheard parts of Frank's final phone call through the wall. The words didn't make sense to me at the time. "It's done." They took the bait completely. Bait? Plans? Timing? Who was my helpless grandfather speaking to? And what had he been orchestrating while I thought we were on the verge of losing everything? The very next morning, Patricia returned, riding high on her so-called victory. She practically glowed with arrogance, arriving with a full moving crew like she was invading a conquered territory. "Hope you found somewhere else to live," she sneered, that self-satisfied smirk plastered across her face. "Because this is my property now." She strutted around with paperwork, a locksmith ready to change our locks, and the air of someone who believed she had pulled off the perfect crime. Frank stayed in character, slumped in his wheelchair, silent and broken, like a man stripped of all hope. His act was so convincing that even I was frustrated with him, unable to understand why he hadn't truly fought back. Patricia ordered her crew about, speaking of renovations and profits as if we didn't exist. She had no idea she was standing at the edge of her own downfall. To her, Frank was nothing more than a defeated old man. But then it happened. Black SUVs appeared out of nowhere, surrounding the house so quickly and silently that no one noticed until a booming voice echoed through a megaphone. "FBI, everyone down. This is a federal operation." Patricia's smugness evaporated instantly. Her eyes went wide with panic, her perfect little empire crumbling before it even began. "What the hell is happening?" she shrieked, spinning in disbelief as armed agents stormed through the front door. I was just as stunned. Why was the FBI here? Why did they care about what I thought was a simple property scam? Patricia's disbelief bordered on pathetic. "This is impossible," she screamed as tactical officers swept in. "He's just a disabled old man. Why would the FBI be here? You could practically see her mind collapsing under the weight of a reality she couldn't process. Her perfect victim wasn't supposed to have federal connections. Her foolproof scam wasn't supposed to attract this kind of heat. And yet, here she was face to face with armed agents dismantling everything she thought she had built. Agent Martinez stepped forward with complete authority, immediately eclipsing Patricia's false posturing. "Patricia Sterling, you are under arrest," she declared firmly, leaving Patricia sputtering like she'd just been dropped into a nightmare. When I demanded answers, Martinez looked at Frank, then at me, and delivered the shock that made everything click. "Your grandfather has FBI protection." Suddenly, all the strange behaviors made sense. The secret calls, the hidden emergency phone, the button built into his wheelchair. My grandfather had been carrying the weight of a hidden life, all to protect me. And in that instant, Frank transformed. He straightened up in his chair, his defeated mask gone. He looked like a man who had been playing a masterful game all along and had finally declared checkmate. "I'm sorry I kept you in the dark, Jake," he said with calm conviction. "I couldn't risk your safety." Agent Martinez explained further. Years ago, Frank had helped the Bureau take down corrupt officers, and since then, they'd kept an eye on him. That hidden button in his chair had triggered an immediate federal response the moment Patricia forced him to sign. Patricia's entire world imploded. The victim she thought was nothing more than an easy mark turned out to be a retired detective with ties to the FBI. Her careful months of planning had been built on a complete miscalculation. The predator had just become the prey. What Agent Martinez revealed next stunned me as much as it terrified me. Years ago, Frank had been instrumental in exposing corrupt police officers. While he didn't live with bodyguards at his side, the FBI had given him an emergency protection arrangement. When Patricia forced his hand, that hidden panic button triggered an immediate response, and every conversation inside our home since then had been secretly recorded. "We've been monitoring since yesterday," Martinez explained. They had needed undeniable proof of Patricia's criminal intent, and she had unknowingly handed it to them. She'd confessed to multiple felonies while federal agents listened in on every word. My emotions clashed: anger at being kept in the dark, but also pride in realizing that Frank had never been as helpless as he let on. The less I knew, the safer I had been. It hurt, but the reasoning was sound. If Patricia suspected I had knowledge of Frank's past, I would have been a target too. Even as she was surrounded by agents, Patricia tried clinging to her authority. She waved documents in the air, insisting, "This is legal. This is my property." Martinez shut her down instantly. "All obtained through coercion and fraud. Federal law does not recognize contracts signed under threats." Patricia's collapse was swift and brutal. The very system she thought she had manipulated was now crushing her under the weight of serious federal charges. And her crimes stretched far beyond us. Martinez explained that Patricia was wanted in several states for similar schemes, leaving behind elderly victims and even suspicious deaths. Frank's situation had provided the perfect opportunity to catch her in the act and dismantle her entire operation. It hit me then. My grandfather hadn't been a victim at all. He was the reason this entire criminal network was finally being exposed. But the biggest revelation was still to come. Martinez revealed that Patricia's group specifically targeted individuals who had assisted the FBI. Frank was not chosen at random. They knew exactly who he was and what he had done. The realization chilled me to my core. This wasn't just a property scam. It was a calculated assassination attempt dressed up as elder fraud. The theft of our home was merely the cover. The true goal had been Frank's life. I felt nauseous at the thought. I'd been so focused on losing the house that I hadn't realized my grandfather's life was in real danger. Martinez continued. Patricia's organization had been operating for years, hunting down witnesses who had cooperated with the FBI. They had already been linked to at least a dozen suspicious deaths across multiple state cases disguised as accidents, robberies, or natural causes. Frank had been their next intended accident. As Martinez explained further, I learned just how important my grandfather really was. His testimony years ago had led to the conviction of 15 corrupt officers in a massive racketeering case. The criminal network those officers protected had sworn revenge on every witness who testified, and ever since, they'd been quietly eliminating them one by one. ensuring the deaths didn't draw attention. Frank, confined to a wheelchair, looked like an easy mark to them. He was vulnerable, forgettably perfect prey, but they had underestimated him. The horror of it all washed over me. All this time, I thought she was just some crazy woman trying to steal our house, I told Martinez, my voice shaking. I never imagined someone was actually planning to murder my grandfather. It was almost unbearable to realize how close we had come. If Frank hadn't pressed that emergency button, a broken bar, if the FBI hadn't been listening, a broken bar, Patricia's plan would have worked. Frank's death would have been written off as another sad, ordinary tragedy, and no one would have questioned it. Instead, her own arrogance had handed the FBI exactly what they needed. In a desperate attempt to lessen her punishment, Patricia spilled everything. She revealed the full reach of their revenge campaign, naming other witnesses still in danger, admitting to prior murders, and explaining how their group had shifted from straightforward contract killings to sophisticated schemes designed to stay invisible to federal investigators. She even bragged about how clever the property scam method was. An elderly person caught up in a legal dispute who conveniently dies doesn't usually draw suspicion. It allowed them to quietly eliminate federal witnesses while making it look like nothing more than the fallout of civil litigation. Frank refused to let fear silence him. I can't let other families go through what we just endured, he told Agent Martinez. If my testimony can stop them from hurting more innocent people, then I have to speak out. I didn't hesitate for a second. I stood with him. We'll finish this together, Grandpa. Patricia's psychological attacks had tested us to the limit, but instead of breaking us apart, they welded our family closer than ever. The FBI wasted no time. Frank's protection was instantly upgraded to armed security around the clock, advanced communication systems, and full protocols treating his case as a direct assault on the federal justice system. Martinez explained that Frank's ordeal proved there was a nationwide threat against anyone cooperating with federal law enforcement. Other witnesses across the country were warned immediately and given enhanced protection because of what we uncovered. With federal resources unleashed, Patricia's empire collapsed almost overnight. Raids across several states led to dozens of arrests, including the leader who had ordered Frank's death. Agents seized millions in cash and assets, exposing a conspiracy that went far beyond property scams. It was a massive web of fraud, intimidation, contract killings, and corruption of public officials that had thrived for over a decade. Patricia's fake HOA was nothing more than the surface of a criminal iceberg. For me, the transformation was profound. I had gone from an ordinary student to someone standing at the center of a federal criminal case. For the first time, I truly understood the weight of my grandfather's lifelong sacrifices in helping the FBI fight dangerous criminals. He had carried that burden silently for years, never telling me the risks he faced. I want to become a federal prosecutor, I told Martinez. I want to help protect other families, just like you protected us. What once felt like an abstract dream now became a calling. The truth shocked our community. The quiet neighborhood had unknowingly been the hunting ground for professional killers targeting a federal witness. Media coverage exploded, raising national awareness about elder fraud being used as a cover for deadly crimes. Federal funding soon poured into programs designed to safeguard vulnerable communities, and our street became a model for protecting elderly residents from sophisticated criminal threats. Frank's legacy changed forever. What had once been hidden shame turned into celebrated heroism. His willingness to testify about witness intimidation and targeted killings made him the public face of witness protection reform. He was invited to congressional hearings, interviewed by national media, and even traveled the country speaking about his story. The man Patricia had dismissed as a weak, wheelchair-bound victim became the symbol of resilience who destroyed her empire. Agent Martinez herself was promoted, receiving commendation for her work on Frank's case. At her ceremony, she credited him directly. Frank's courage gave us the evidence we needed to bring down an entire criminal network. His case will be studied for years as proof of how witness cooperation can topple organized crime. From that moment on, Martinez wasn't just our protector, she became part of our family, bonded by the dangers we survived together. Patricia's end came swiftly. At her federal trial, She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Every dollar of her seized assets was redirected to victims and their families. Her so-called authority dissolved, replaced by the harsh walls of a prison cell. She died there 8 years later, forgotten by the world, remembered only by the families who finally had closure. My own path was equally clear. Inspired by Frank's bravery and guided by Agent Martinez, I accepted an internship with the Federal Witness Protection Program. Law school no longer felt theoretical, it was purposeful. You've seen firsthand why this work matters, Martinez told me. Your grandfather's courage should be the foundation of your career. What began as a fight for survival had turned into something greater. Frank and I were no longer just protector and protectee, we were partners, ready to help safeguard other families from the darkness we had faced. Agent Martinez eventually revealed one final truth that tied everything together. Patricia's organization hadn't been working alone, they had inside help. A corrupt federal employee had been selling confidential information about protected witnesses. That meant Frank's testimony wouldn't just expose Patricia's network, it would also reveal a traitor within the FBI itself, putting us at risk from agents who had been compromised. The thought was horrifying. Who inside the FBI had been betraying the very people they were sworn to protect? And how high did that corruption go? Anadrama-nest viewers, share your thoughts below. Have you ever been blindsided by a family member's hidden truth? Martinez laid it out clearly. Someone with access to the witness database had leaked my grandfather's location and history. The realization made me sick. Innocent people who trusted the FBI had been sold out for money. Frank's testimony wasn't just going to end Patricia's reign, it was going to drag a federal traitor into the light. Even knowing this made him an even bigger target. Frank never hesitated. Some things matter more than staying safe, he told me when I worried. If I stay quiet, other families will face what we faced, and they might not survive it. The publicity will protect us. It's hard to erase someone who's on the front page of every paper, and I stood right with him. We've come this far, Grandpa. We're not backing down now. Patricia's trial testimony was shocking. Cornered by the reality of life in prison, she confessed everything to the corrupt FBI insider who sold witness information, the crime bosses behind the murders, and the ruthless system they built to eliminate anyone who cooperated with law enforcement. She admitted to dozens of killings staged as accidents, each one carefully planned. Frank's case had been the crack in the wall that let it all come crashing down. Her cooperation earned her life behind bars instead of something worse, but watching her plead for mercy after the terror she caused was satisfying beyond words. The corrupt agent didn't escape justice. Patricia named him directly, and within days he was arrested. A deputy marshal who had spent 15 years betraying the very program he was sworn to protect, selling out witnesses for $50,000 each. For a decade and a half, he had been helping criminals hunt the innocent. Thanks to Frank's courage, a level of corruption no one had imagined was exposed and eliminated. Sometimes the good guys do enough, but only when people like Frank are brave enough to fight. Frank became a national hero. His story went public at congressional hearings, television appearances, nationwide speaking tours. My grandfather, wheelchair-bound but unstoppable, became the face of witness protection reform. The FBI director himself presented him with a civilian award for extraordinary courage in the face of criminal threats. Patricia thought she had chosen an easy victim. Instead, she picked the one man who would destroy her entire empire and shine a light on federal corruption. For me, everything changed too. My FBI career began on the fast track. Thanks to Martinez's support, I specialized in cases of elder fraud and witness protection because I had lived it. Martinez told me during training, "You understand why this work matters in a way no textbook can teach. Let your grandfather's courage guide you." She became more than a mentor, she became family. Patricia's downfall was absolute. Life without parole. Every stolen dollar seized and redirected to compensate her victims. Locked away in a federal prison where even her old allies couldn't reach her. She spent her final years in isolation, forgotten by the world. 8 years later, she died there. I only learned about it because Martinez told me. Nobody else even cared. Our neighborhood, once Patricia's hunting ground, transformed into a national model for community safety. Federal grants funded new programs that were soon replicated across the country. Frank's home, The very property Patricia had tried to steal with violence was turned into a community center for elder advocacy. The place she wanted to take became a beacon of protection and support for others. Whenever I pass that center, I think about how Patricia's greed and cruelty unintentionally built something beautiful that protects families like ours. The millions seized from her network were used to compensate fraud victims and give closure to families who had lost loved ones. Frank's bravery didn't just save USA, it delivered justice to countless others. Families who thought they'd never know the truth about suspicious deaths and stolen properties finally found closure. Frank's book about his journey became required reading in FBI training, and his consulting work with federal elder fraud prevention saved thousands of potential victims. The wheelchair Patricia once mocked as a weakness turned into a powerful symbol of resilience in the fight against elder abuse. Frank traveled across the country, teaching communities how to spot scams and stand up against intimidation. He transformed his darkest chapter into a mission that protected countless families. My graduation from law school and the FBI Academy was his proudest moment. Sitting in the audience, Frank beamed as Agent Martinez handed me my badge. We had come full circle, once victims, now protectors. The scared college kid who couldn't shield his grandfather had grown into a federal agent specializing in the very crimes we survived. Frank's courage didn't just inspire my career, it shaped my purpose. Agent Martinez earned a promotion to lead the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force, and Frank's case became the national model for dismantling criminal organizations that prey on law enforcement cooperation. Congressional recognition, new policies, and sweeping reforms changed how federal witnesses were protected. What began as Patricia's arrest grew into a lifelong friendship between Martinez and our family, built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. The ripple effects were enormous. Patricia's takedown triggered dozens of prosecutions across multiple states, reforms in witness protection, and national awareness programs that shielded thousands of elderly Americans from scams. One fake HOA president's downfall sparked systemic changes that safeguarded vulnerable people everywhere. 3 years later, at my FBI badge ceremony, Frank's pride was overwhelming. Martinez spoke about how his bravery saved more lives than we'll ever know. She was right. We had gone from victims to heroes, from helpless to empowered, from isolated to part of a nationwide community fighting for justice. The woman who thought she could intimidate and erase federal witnesses learned the hard way. Some people fight back harder than anyone expects. This experience taught me that the most vulnerable citizens often become the strongest heroes when they refuse to back down. If your family has faced elder fraud, share your story in the comments to help protect others. Remember, criminals thrive on silence and isolation, but when communities unite with courage, justice always wins. Sometimes the person they think is weakest is exactly the one who brings them down. Hit that like button if you enjoyed watching this fake HOA president get what she deserved, and stay tuned for the next Anna Drama-nest story proving that crime never pays. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay vigilant out there. That escalated quickly. Classic Anna Drama-nest. Like, share, and click the next video if you're ready for more stories of courage and justice.